I love that line. Fuller, go easy on the Pepsi. Pepsi.
Yeah.
Gets me to thinking about Pepsi. You know this drink? The world's second favorite cola, as it's known to the world.
That's the way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you know about Pepsi?
I know it was made in 1893 by a man named Caleb Bradham. And you know what? Its first name wasn't actually Pepsi. It was called Brad's Drink.
Yep. I didn't know that, but I figured the guy was named Brad. I didn't know he was Caleb.
I thought his name was Brad too. I think Bradham, he shorted to Brad, and then it became Brad's Drink as a result. Not that that matters, because 5 years later, he renamed it Pepsi Cola. You know where that name comes from? Pepsi?
Peptic
Pepsin.
system.
Yeah. It comes from the Greek word pepsin, which means digestion. The reason he called it pepsin, though, was because he was a drugstore operator.
Of course he was.
And he was trying to create something that would ease digestion and boost energy.
They were just shooting from the hip back then. They're like, oh, what are these roots that we can mix together?
You got a stomach ache? Take some soda, water, and some vanilla and sugar, and that'll make you feel better. And it's always been chasing Coke. Coke has been the most successful soda basically since soda was invented. When Pepsi was invented, Coke already had about 100% of the market share on that. Everyone was drinking Coca-Cola, and Pepsi was just this little name brand. It really had to struggle to compete. It went bankrupt in the 1920s after World War I, basically because the fluctuating sugar prices during World War I. You had a lot of sugar refineries in France that were just unable to produce sugar and export it. You had trouble getting sugar over here because of all the U-boats, and beet production was down. A lot of the beet crops were destroyed as a result. And so Pepsi ends up going bankrupt in 1923, and that's when Caleb Bradham loses it, and he has to sell it off to somebody else who takes this losing company and has to find a way to make it compete against Coca-Cola, which is still the name brand.
Right. I mean, Coca-Cola is the timeless brand. Right? Yes. It's just like the age-old Coke is Coke, and everyone knows what it is, and it's the beloved brand. And Pepsi, the Pepsi that we know for our entire lives, has always been what seems like the challenger brand, right?
Yeah.
Coke doesn't have to defend the throne. Coke is always Coke.
Yeah.
But Pepsi is more nimble because Pepsi isn't Coke.
Pepsi always had to stay on its toes, basically. It was just, for at least the first half of the century, it felt like it was almost on the brink of collapse. It was never even a reasonable competitor to Coke. Pepsi was just kind of the poor man's cola, essentially. And that's how they actually started. Once Caleb Bradham lost the company, they started really going for basically poor people. They gained a lot of prominence in the Great Depression because you could buy a 12-ounce bottle of Pepsi for a nickel, and that's how much a 6.5-ounce bottle of Coke cost at the same price. And the only reason that that happened was because Pepsi couldn't afford the bottling prices. They couldn't afford to get new bottles. So as a result, they had to recycle beer bottles, which were larger than cola bottles.
Sure.
But nobody wanted to pay more than a nickel for cola. So Pepsi turns that around and says, we'll give you twice as much for a nickel.
Because they can produce 30 ounces of it for a penny or something.
The cola isn't what's expensive. The glass is what's expensive.
It's the delivery system.
Yeah, and when you're making people feel like they're getting a bargain by buying your cola, then they're going to do it, especially during the Great Depression.
Right.
They continue to do this on into the 40s, marketing to poor communities where Coke didn't market. Coke didn't care if poor people were drinking their stuff because they were making enough as it was. And Pepsi finds those cracks, finds those places to fit in as a way of competing against the titan that is Coca-Cola. And I remember growing up and hearing this Pepsi challenge, you know, and like, what's that about? You know, this blind taste test that Pepsi introduced in the 1970s. That's sort of, I don't know, that's sort of where I think of it as this pop culture phenomena is the Pepsi challenge.
Yeah.
Because at the time, Coke continues to have a greater market share than Pepsi when it comes to sodas. Pepsi is actually a more successful company than Coca-Cola because of its diversified portfolio.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, think of the brands that you don't necessarily think of as Pepsi products, but Gatorade.
Yeah.
I mean, Gatorade massively beats out Powerade in the market.
They merged with Frito-Lay in 1965.
That's
Everything
right.
under the Frito-Lay banner is Pepsi's.
Doritos, right? Lay's potato chips. That is a Pepsi product.
Yeah. So Pepsi is more successful when it comes to a company, a conglomerate.
Yeah.
But Coca-Cola still beats it out. But in the 1970s, Pepsi was really trying to shake it up. They really wanted to appeal to young people. This challenge, take the Pepsi challenge. It kind of invites in. We've done the Pepsi challenge on our show, you know?
Have.
It's sort of fun to figure out which cola you actually enjoy, and it worked.
Yeah.
People took the Pepsi challenge, and often it led to them deciding, hey, maybe I do like Pepsi a little more. The best thing that the Pepsi challenge did was create new Coke inadvertently, because the Pepsi challenge led to Pepsi getting more market share, and Coke thought, we got to do something to compete. Even though we're winning, even though we're still winning, they're gaining on us. We got to do something to change things up. And that's when they introduced new Coke for 77 days, because people absolutely hated it.
What's the matter, Wilbur? They changed my Coke.
You changed the flavor of Coca-Cola.
You can't change heritage and tradition. You can't change it. Right? What are you going to shave Santa's beard? You can't do it.
No.
Pepsi got under their skin. And they have always had that brilliant marketing tack.
Yes.
Do you know about the corporate espionage thing between Coke and Pepsi from 2006?
I've never heard of this.
There was some sort of, there was an exec at Coca-Cola who was high enough up that they had access to trade secrets for Coca-Cola, and that included some new recipe that was coming out. And they decided to turn coat and approach Pepsi and say, I'm high up in the Coca-Cola company and I will sell you trade secrets. And Pepsi received this message and they immediately called Coke. And they said, hey, you got a mole who's trying to sell us trade secrets. And Coke said, great, thanks for letting us know. We'll call the FBI. FBI then communicates between Coke and Pepsi, and they're like, okay, let's do a sting operation. Pepsi, we're going to pretend to be you. And Pepsi's like, run with it. And so Pepsi just like washes their hands of it. So then they end up stinging this person. They pass like $30,000 in like a shoebox in an airport or something. It's a whole cloak and dagger spy thing. And they end up arresting this person. They go to jail for a number of years. But that story is a funny one to me because you could look at that and say, oh, how high-minded and ethical Pepsi was. The reality is this is the only option that Pepsi has, right?
Yeah.
And they also have they have world-class food scientists.
Yeah.
They could reverse engineer Coca-Cola. That's not of any value to a company like Pepsi. And, we're talking about the cola wars. Mm-hmm. When I think about that, I realize that the cola wars kind of created this duopoly in cola that benefits both brands. Mm-hmm. Coke and Pepsi are almost symbiotic.
Yeah.
Market leadership, it's not a zero-sum game.
No, I do think the fact that there are competitors like this, you do have Pepsi people and you have Coke people, and there's allegiance to either of those brands. And the fact that there is an adversarial component to it, I'm not a Coke person, I'm a Pepsi person, and here's why Pepsi's the best cola that you can drink. You wouldn't have that so much if Coke just owned everything, You wouldn't have brand loyalty to Coke if that's all that there was. But because you have this sort of combative relationship, and it's not the same with other colas either. The relationship between Pepsi and Coke is very unique, and it has been for over a century at this point.
And that's viral marketing, right? I mean, that's sort of that keeps both of them in the conversation.
Yes.
If you are a Pepsi person or a Coke person, that by definition keeps the other brand in the conversation. It makes both feel relevant.
I also love that the fact that Pepsi has competition keeps Coke on its toes. It is a company that had complete dominance in the soda industry since the soda industry's inception. And even still, you had that thing in 1985 where they said Pepsi is gaining on us. They're still way behind us, but we don't want to lose even an inch to Pepsi at this point. We need to start thinking differently. Let's try new Coke. And sometimes those new ideas don't work out, but sometimes they do.
Yeah, I think I would posit that Coke isn't Coke without a perpetual competitor in Pepsi. And if they both provide that sort of safe illusion of choice and variety for one another in the marketplace, then they both succeed. And, it looks like we're the marks.
Yeah.
I'm going to go drink a Pepsi.
I don't know about that. I think you should go easy on the Pepsi.